My sister married my ex who used to choke me. Now he's making unsettling comments about my 13-year-old daughter and nobody believes my gut feeling. I want to be honest about the order in which I failed my daughter, because this story is not about what Derek did. It is about every moment I saw something and talked myself out of it, every room I left her in because the alternative required a confrontation I was not ready to have, every time I chose the comfort of being believed over the safety of being right. I have been carrying the question of when I actually knew, the real knowing, not the surface dismissal I performed for my family but the deeper recognition I felt in my body before my brain caught up, and the honest answer is that I knew before the first comment. I knew the moment my sister called to tell me she was seeing him, 2 years before the wedding, 2 years before any of this reached the shape it has now. I knew it then and I said nothing useful and I kept saying nothing useful for 2 years while the man who used to put his hands around my throat became a permanent fixture in my family's life and began spending time in rooms that contained my child. Everything I am about to tell you follows from that original silence. I have to own it completely before I can tell the rest of it honestly. His name is Derek. I was with him for 2 years when I was 23. I want to tell you what those 2 years were like, but I also need to be careful here, because the point of this story is not the history between Derek and me. The point is my daughter. So I will say this much and only this much. Derek was the kind of person who understood control the way some people understand a language, fluently, naturally, without having to think about it. The first time he put his hands around my throat, we were in the middle of an argument and it lasted less than 5 seconds, and afterward he was so immediately remorseful and so completely convincing in his remorse that I spent the next 3 days reassuring him that I was not going to leave. I want you to sit with that sentence. He did it. And I spent 3 days reassuring him. That is the specific architecture of the dynamic he created, and I lived inside it for 2 years before I got out, and getting out required a clarity that took me a long time to reach and a support system I was fortunate enough to have when I finally reached it. I left Derek when I was 25. My sister Renee was 20 at the time, still in college, peripheral to my adult life in the way that younger siblings can be when there is enough age gap that your worlds have not yet fully overlapped. She knew I had ended a relationship. She did not know the full shape of why. I did not tell her because I was 25 and still in the process of understanding it myself, still in the slow work of reassembling a sense of myself that 2 years with Derek had quietly taken apart. I told my mother the broad version. I told my closest friend the full version. I told Renee essentially nothing, which was a decision I made for reasons that felt reasonable at the time and that I have thought about differently every day for the past 2 years. I met my daughter's father at 27, married at 29, had Lily at 30. The marriage did not survive Lily's early years, not dramatically, not with any specific villain, just 2 people who had made a choice they were not equipped to sustain and who figured that out too late to avoid the damage of figuring it out. We co-parent. It is functional. Lily is 13 now, bright and funny and in possession of a specific kind of perceptiveness that children develop when they have spent enough time reading the emotional weather of adult rooms. She notices things. She has always noticed things. I have thought about that quality of hers a great deal recently. Renee called me 2 years ago to tell me she was seeing someone. She said his name and I felt something happen in my body that I did not let reach my face, or my voice, or the response I gave her. I felt it the way you feel something you have been trying not to feel for a long time when it finally arrives without warning. Derek. She was seeing Derek. The man who had spent 2 years teaching me that my discomfort was an overreaction and my fear was a character flaw and my instincts about my own safety were not to be trusted. Renee was 26. She was an adult. She sounded happy. And I said, carefully, that I had dated him briefly and it had not worked out, which was the most aggressively insufficient description of 2 years of my life that I have ever produced, and I said I hoped she would be careful, and she laughed and said I sounded like Mom, and we moved on. I have gone back to that phone call in my head more times than I can count. I have tried to construct the version of that conversation in which I said what I actually needed to say, in which I told Renee not the carefully managed version but the true version, the hands around the throat version, the 3 days of reassuring him version, the full 2 years of it. I cannot find that version. What I find instead is the specific fear that held me in the version I actually gave her. The fear of not being believed. The fear of being seen as bitter or jealous or unable to let go. The fear of saying the true thing and watching it be dismissed, which is a fear that anyone who has spent time with a person like Derek learns in their body before they learn it anywhere else. He had taught me, over 2 years, that my perceptions were not reliable. And in the moment I most needed my perceptions to be reliable, I was still carrying that lesson. The wedding was 14 months ago. I went. I stood in the back of a venue I had driven to with my chest tight and I watched my sister marry a man who had put his hands around my throat and I smiled when smiling was required and I did not make a scene and I did not say the thing that needed to be said because I had by then constructed an elaborate internal justification for my silence that I believed completely at the time. The justification was this: Renee was an adult who had made her choice and was entitled to make it. I could not force information on someone who had not asked for it. My history with Derek was my history, and Renee deserved to build her own experience without my interference. I believed every word of that justification. I used it to walk into that wedding and smile. I have not been able to use it since. The first comment Derek made about Lily happened at a family dinner 4 months after the wedding. I want to be precise about this because precision matters here, and I have been told, more than once in the months since, that I am not being precise, that I am reading into things, that I am projecting my history onto innocent remarks. So I am going to tell you exactly what he said, and I am going to let you hold it and decide for yourself what it is. Lily had come downstairs in the middle of dinner to ask me something, hair still damp from the shower, wearing the oversized sweatshirt and leggings that is her standard home outfit, 13 years old, completely ordinary, completely a child. Derek watched her cross the room and said, to no one in particular but loud enough for the table to hear, "She's going to be trouble when she grows up." And then he smiled, the specific smile I recognize from 2 years of living with it, the smile that dares you to be the person who makes something of what was just said. I looked at my mother. My mother was already laughing, the light laugh of someone who has heard a familiar type of comment and filed it as harmless. My brother-in-law on the other side of the table had not looked up from his plate. Lily had not heard it, or if she had not registered it. I sat with what I had just heard, and I felt the thing in my body again, the same thing from the phone call 2 years ago, and I did what I had been doing for 2 years. I filed it. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself it was a clumsy compliment delivered badly. I told myself that my history with Derek was coloring everything he said and did in my presence, and that was my problem to manage, not his conduct to be alarmed by. I told myself that. I did not believe it. But I told myself that. The second comment came 6 weeks later. A different family gathering, Lily in the kitchen helping my mother with something, Derek coming in to refill his drink and saying to Lily, directly to her this time, not to the room, "You've got your mom's eyes. She was the prettiest girl I ever dated." And then looking at me across the kitchen with that same smile. Lily had said thank you in the slightly awkward way of a 13-year-old receiving a compliment from an adult she does not know well enough to be comfortable with, and then moved closer to my mother in the small, instinctive way that children move when they are not entirely at ease. I watched that movement. I watched my daughter move her body away from Derek and towards safety, and I felt the full weight of every choice I had not made arrive in my chest simultaneously. That evening I told my mother. I told her about both comments. I told her they made me uncomfortable and that I did not want Derek to speak to Lily that way. My mother listened. She was kind about it. And then she said the thing I had been afraid she would say since the phone call 2 years ago. She said she thought I was having a hard time with the fact that Renee had married someone from my past, and that it was understandable, and that perhaps some conversations with a therapist might help me separate what was real from what my history was creating. She said Derek was family now. She said Renee was happy. She said these things with the gentleness of someone who loves you and is also, completely, missing the point. I drove home with Lily in the passenger seat, and I looked at my daughter's profile in the dark of the car, and I made a decision that I should have made 2 years ago when Renee first called me with his name. I was done filing things. I was done managing my own perception to accommodate other people's comfort. I was done letting the fear of being dismissed keep me quiet in situations where quiet was not safe. The question was what to do with that decision. And the answer to that question was harder than the decision itself. I told Renee everything 3 days after the kitchen comment. I did not manage it. I did not find the careful, palatable version. I called her and I told her about the 2 years, the full 2 years, in the specific and unsparing detail that I had withheld from everyone except one friend for a decade. I told her about the hands around my throat. I told her it had happened more than once. I told her about the 3 days I spent reassuring him afterward. I told her about the architecture of it, the way he had taught me that my perceptions were not reliable, the way he had made me the problem in every situation where he was the cause. I told her all of it. And then I told her about the comments. Both of them. Exactly as they had happened. Exactly what he had said and exactly what his face had done when he said it. Renee was quiet for a long time after I finished. Long enough that I thought, for a moment, that the quiet was the beginning of understanding. That the full version, finally delivered, was going to produce the response that the managed version had never been able to produce. I thought that for approximately 40 seconds. And then she said, very carefully, that she was sorry I had experienced what I described, but that the Derek she knew was not that person. She said people changed. She said she had been with him for 2 years and had never seen anything that matched what I was describing. She said the comments about Lily were, to her, exactly what they appeared to be, a clumsy compliment from a man who was still adjusting to the social dynamics of a blended family. She said she thought I needed help processing my past. She said she loved me. She said she had to go. I sat with the phone in my hand after she hung up, and I felt something settle into me that was colder and more permanent than disappointment. Because I had known, somewhere underneath the hope of the phone call, that this was the likely outcome. Derek had spent 2 years teaching me how to be dismissed. He had apparently spent 2 years doing the same thing with Renee, building the specific version of himself that she would believe when the other version arrived to challenge it. I do not know this for certain. I'm telling you what it felt like from where I was sitting. What I know for certain is that the full truth, delivered clearly and without management, had produced the same result as every carefully managed version I had offered before it. Renee had chosen the version of Derek she knew. I understood that choice in a way that did not make it hurt less. I called my father next. My parents have been divorced for 11 years, and my father has always been the parent I expected directness from. He listened to the full account. He asked 2 clarifying questions. And then he said something I had not expected and have not stopped thinking about since. He said, "I believe you about what happened. What I don't know is whether what happened then is evidence of what's happening now." He said he thought I should talk to Lily directly and find out whether she had noticed anything or felt uncomfortable in Derek's presence, and that her answer, not anyone else's interpretation of the 2 comments, was the most important data available. He said he would support whatever I decided to do with that information. It was the most useful thing anyone said to me in the entire duration of this situation. Not because it resolved anything. Because it pointed me toward the right question, which was not whether anyone in my family believed me but whether my daughter was safe and whether she knew she could tell me if she was not. I talked to Lily that weekend. Not in the way that produces the response you are hoping for, not with leading questions or visible anxiety, but in the way I had been working to build with her since she was old enough to understand what I was trying to build. We have a language between us for the subject of bodies and safety, and the difference between comfortable and uncomfortable, and the absolute non-negotiability of her right to say when something feels wrong. I had built that language deliberately, over years, because of what I knew from my own history about what happens when girls are not given that language early enough. I asked her, in that language, whether anyone in her life had ever said or done something that felt off to her. Whether she had ever felt uncomfortable around someone and not known whether she was allowed to say so. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Derek makes me feel weird." She said it simply, without drama, in the way that children state facts that adults have trained them to doubt. I asked her to tell me more. She said he looked at her sometimes in a way she did not like. She said he had said something to her once, at my mother's house when they had been briefly alone in the hallway, that she had not fully understood but that had made her want to leave the hallway quickly. She could not remember the exact words. She said they were something about how she was growing up fast. She said she had not told me because she was not sure it was a real thing or just her being weird about it. She said she was not sure it was a real thing or just her being weird about it. My 13-year-old daughter, who notices everything, who reads rooms better than most adults, had experienced something that sent her quickly out of a hallway and had spent an unknown amount of time wondering whether her own perception was reliable. I recognized that experience with my entire body. I took Lily out of every family situation that included Derek that same week. I told her directly, in clear language, that her instincts were real and accurate and that she never had to be in a room with someone who made her feel that way. I told her that what she had described was not her being weird. I told her I was sorry it had taken me this long to ask the right question. She cried a little. Not dramatically. The specific relief-adjacent crying of someone who has been carrying something alone and has finally been allowed to put it down. I reported the hallway comment to the relevant authorities the following week. I want to say that plainly without providing details that are not mine to share publicly. I made the report. I documented both dinner table comments with dates and the exact words as I remembered them. I documented Lily's account of the hallway in writing immediately after our conversation while the details were fresh. I did everything I should have done, and I did it as quickly as I could after Lily told me what she had told me. The family response to all of this was, in its broad shape, what I had expected and what I had already decided I could withstand. Renee was devastated and furious, and her devastation and fury were directed at me in the way of someone whose entire understanding of her life is being challenged and who needs a target for that challenge that is not the person she has built the life with. My mother called me 3 times in the first week with versions of the same conversation, asking me to consider what I was doing to the family, asking me whether I had thought about the consequences, asking me whether I was certain. I told her each time, without escalating, that I was certain about my daughter and that my daughter was the only certainty that mattered in this situation. The certainty cost things. It cost the version of my family that existed before I made the calls. It cost the Sunday dinners and the holiday tables and the particular texture of belonging to a group of people who share your history. It cost my relationship with Renee in the form it had existed, which was not a full relationship. I understand that now. It was a relationship that had been built partly on my silence, and silence is not a foundation, it is just the absence of the thing that would have challenged the structure. What was built on my silence was always temporary. I just did not know how temporary until the silence ended. What I have now is Lily. Lily who knows her instincts are real. Lily who has been told clearly and repeatedly that her body's signals are data, not character flaws, not overreactions, not evidence of being weird. Lily who came to me last month with something small, a comment a classmate had made that bothered her, and who told me about it the same day it happened, without wondering whether she was allowed to. That is the thing I'm most focused on. Not the family reconfiguration, not the investigation, not the question of what ultimately happens to Derek or what Renee decides to do with the information she now has. Lily. I failed her by being quiet for 2 years. I failed her every time I filed a comment and told myself I was overreacting. I failed her in the specific way of a person who had been taught that her own perceptions were not reliable and had passed the consequences of that lesson on to her daughter without meaning to. I am not going to continue failing her by being quiet again. My father called me last week. He said he had been thinking about the conversation we had after I told him everything. He said he wanted me to know that he believed me, the full version, not just the present tense of it but the history of it too. He said he was sorry it had taken him this long to say that clearly. He said he was sorry it had taken any of us this long. I told him it was okay. It was not entirely okay. But it was the kind of not entirely okay that you accept because the person offering it is doing the best they can with what they now understand, and understanding, even when it arrives late, is still worth something. Lily is safe. She knows she is safe. She knows her instincts are real and that I will believe her and that the door between us is open in the specific way that matters most, the way that does not require her to manage my reaction before she tells me the truth. I spent 2 years managing everyone's reaction before I told the truth. I watched what that cost. I am not passing that particular inheritance to my daughter. She deserves to move through the world knowing that her perception of it is reliable. So did I. I just found out too late. And the only thing I can do with too late is make sure it stops here, at me, and does not travel one generation further down. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point.